Ahoy! For the entire week of the New World expansion PTR, I pretty much did nothing but play PTR and make videos about it, and I want to share my experience during those days, what I liked and what I disliked. This video will purely be about the things that I liked and enjoyed, and in the next days I will also be talking about the things that I didn't enjoy, the things that I feel neutral about, as well as if I think the expansion is a true expansion. Keep in mind that all of this is based on PTR, so it's subject to change and some things were clearly unfinished. And also I was playing on 250 ping, which made some things like PvP significantly harder to test. The first thing that I really enjoyed were mounts. I know that some people say that mounts don't really have a place in New World, we don't really need them, but after having used mounts for a bit, I will say they fit perfectly into New World, and I didn't want to go back to the live servers where we don't have mounts. It feels so much better to navigate the world with mounts, and it feels so much more fun to have that quick movement option in between, and it's also nice how they somewhat weave into other aspects as well, like for example, you can use them in OPR. The movement with the mount feels excellent, even on ping it does feel like a mount, it's not like normal running, but it has a good responsiveness to it, and the speed is also not too much in my opinion, it's a good mid-level, and also there are new features that the mount brings with it. For example, there is an auto-walk option on the road now. If you use auto-walk while on the road, the mount will kinda try to follow the road somewhat. It will walk off the road if there's a huge bend or something, but small obstacles are something you usually avoid automatically, so that feels very nice. You get a lot of the mount decorations for free, so it's not massively gated either. I think that's also good to know. I think there were some issues with the mount unlock, so most people were only able to try the horse as a mount, me included, and I think it will also be cool to see the other mounts. One of the places where I took the mount is of course the new zone. That said, it wasn't exactly the place where you really need a mount. You can run through the new zone in roughly 10 minutes. But the zone is very different from Brimstone Sands in that regard. Brimstone Sands has these wide open spaces with not much going on, it's a desert, and the new zone, Elysian Wilds, is kind of the opposite. Everything is very condensed, there are constantly places that you need to go to, a lot of verticality as well, places where you have to go up and down, and can explore all different kinds of things, so overall that was really cool to me. The new questline stopped at some point on PTR, so we couldn't see the ending yet, and there were also a few placeholders for trailers. But what I saw so far was nice, and there were also a lot of side quests around that, so generally I think the zone will have plenty to do if you like PvE exploration and quests. The nods to the Old First Light areas and characters from Old First Light were also very nice to see, that made it more enjoyable to me personally. The new zone also came with a new expedition, the Savage Divide, and I completely changed my opinion on that. Initially I had the option to play it only as the story mode because they didn't unlock mutations, and that was very boring to be honest. It was just way too easy, there was no challenge at all, story mode is just story mode. But later on PTR we got mutation access, and that's a whole different story. This expedition is challenging. I would say it's probably currently at least the most challenging expedition in the game. There are some things that will likely make it easier once it gets to life, which I think is kind of unfortunate. I would like it to stay as hard as it is, but the higher level difficulties of this were absolutely rough, and I loved it. Also, something that some of you will really enjoy to hear, this expedition is the first one that in my opinion heavily favors ranged PvE, just because it makes many of the mechanics much easier. I'm sure once things are fully optimized, especially speedrunning groups will still go full melee, that's usually where it ends up, you just have to figure out how to avoid most of the damage. The rapier also got buffed in some ridiculous ways that I entirely disagree with. I think that's one of the worst changes of the expansion, but we'll get to that later, and that makes playing melee very risk-free no matter how much damage is getting thrown at you. But that said, for the average park group where you don't know how good other players in your group are, I think ranged builds will be very viable. Especially the boss fights go absolutely crazy with different mechanics being thrown at you at once, but still in more control than, for example, the Forged. You can still see very much what's going on, and I think that's super fun. Shoutouts to Arshi and Adorian, by the way, who ran the M3 with me. Of course, completely flawlessly. And since we're already talking about expeditions, we also had the Ward, Bane and Resilient removal. I think this is excellent. It makes it so much easier to just grab random gear and hop into an expedition on PTR without worrying too much what's on it. Obviously it's not going to be optimal gear, but you have something that's half decent for one thing, it's going to be half decent for everything. On the top end I'm sure people will still min-max. For example in PvE you're usually probably not going to use much gear with freedom, whereas in PvP, depending on your build, you may not want to risk running as much harnessing, the extra damage perk that exists now, because you may need other perks more. I will talk about that in more detail in the future. But that said, if you don't have optimal gear, you can basically use your PvP gear as a 2-perker in PvE, or the other way around. It's still going to be fine for that, and that feels really good. For our M3 I just grabbed some PvP gear that I'd already crafted. At this point a quick reminder, if you're enjoying the video so far and you want to see more about the expansion, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. If you want to have early trading tips and gathering tips for the expansion, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Artifacts are a great new addition to the game. They feel very fun and they offer a lot of new unique playstyles that just open up the game in so many ways. Of course, they are currently far from perfectly balanced, but that doesn't stop them from being fun. They will really shake up the meta, especially in PvP, but even in PvE, multiple of them are very strong and very interesting. And I'm sure some of them will also get tuned down over time to not be as overbearing in those metas, but they do feel really good. On the other hand, most, not all, most of them also don't feel overly oppressive. Take for example Scorpion Sting, which is generally considered one of the stronger artifacts for good reason, because it can pull people towards you or kind of knock them back rather in the opposite direction of where they get hit by Javelin. First of all, it relies on landing Javelin. Me trying to do that on 250 ping, yeah, you can imagine that didn't go very well. So there's an immediate important skill flaw here. And beyond that, the perks on Scorpion Sting itself aren't particularly impressive. You have Sundering Javelin, which is usually not one of the most valued perks on a weapon, and also you have Transient Strikes. So you can, for example, not get Enfeebling Skewer on a weapon. This means while you're getting this really cool and strong pull mechanic, which is absolutely going to be useful in many situations, it's also not exactly the best melee weapon to trade. If someone jumps you with a spear with Vicious, Attunement, and Enfeebling Skewer, as long as they're roughly evenly skilled, they will beat you up if you're trying to trade into them with Scorpion Sting. And many other artifacts have similar trade-offs or niches where they can be used. So I'm very curious to see where this will take artifacts long term, but I'm also happy that they're intentionally giving them things like illegal weapon combinations just specifically for that artifact, so there's a lot of fun stuff to try around with. We also have a completely new weapon though, the Flail. Once again, I'm not talking about balance here, but from a design perspective, this feels like a very fun weapon. It has a lot of unique tools that make it very interesting and very enjoyable. You have nice mobility if you want to, but you can also just choose to be fully static and more of a debuffer and provide more utility. There are very interesting effects when it comes to fighting in a clump, especially pairing this with other tanks is going to be very interesting. And I think this will be some serious competition to Sword and Shield in wars as a main utility. It's not going to replace it because they do different things, but from its state on PTR, it seems like it's going to be able to shake up the war meta. Likewise, I can absolutely see this having a place in PvE, maybe even as far as having your tank and your healer in one role and having 4 full DPS along with that. While the weapon animations look very cool, they feel a little bit overbearing in large clump fights, but that might also be a bit skewed by PTR just being everyone trying out the Flail. To me, it felt like quite a few of the abilities had a bit of a difficult time connecting to enemies in PvP with a relatively short range, but keep in mind here, again, 250 ping, and all weapons kind of felt like that, so this might not actually be an issue with the Flail once it hits live. I really like the various crafting changes, along with the removal or replacement of the umbral shard system. I like the prismatic scarab crafting especially, which requires a lot of resources, but allows you to just craft exactly the piece of gear that you want. I think that is great. But I also especially like the dark matter crafting at the gypsum kiln that allows you to re-roll the third perk on named gear into whatever perk you want, which allows you to just make a lot of gear exactly what you want it to be based on something that you got as a drop from something else that you did. This makes a variety of activities rewarding, which is something they said they wanted to do, just give you the option to farm something in a specific place and then recraft that into exactly the item you were looking for, and I think that's great. There are some slightly strange shifts with crafting, like for example making it depend on faction tokens to some degree, which I don't really understand. I guess I just wanted to gate it behind something, but overall I think the changes for the most part are still very good. Something that I haven't seen discussed much so far, but I think is really interesting and really nice, is the equip load rework. So in case you missed it, there were various different changes to equip load. First of all, you basically have less resilient in light now, because resilient doesn't exist and it's just built into your equip load now, and the same amount as before in heavy, and medium also has slightly less. And along with that, the dodges were also changed, so that the medium dodge and the heavy dodge especially are a lot smoother now. They're not kind of this forward hop that stops, but rather a smooth transition, and it feels like you can move a little bit further with the two. And on top of that, the duration until you can get a full dodge again after being hit by a melee attack has also been reduced back somewhat. So if you're in light and you get hit by a melee attack, you are easier, quicker able to dodge the full distance again. All of these changes overall make mobility feel fairly different. Again, ping made it hard to fully judge this, especially in medium, but the dodges definitely felt smoother. Heavy almost felt like medium felt before in terms of mobility. There's definitely an improvement there in terms of what a dodge actually does. Beforehand it felt almost useless in heavy a lot of the time, so now it actually feels like it has some value. At the same time, in combination with some other damage increases and perk changes, you can definitely also get rewarded for playing light still and just going very glass cannon. You can have a very high impact through just very high damage, so it's not like you're getting punished for playing light. The patch also came with a variety of weapon perk changes and perk changes of existing perks in general, like for example Keen Speed, and many of them are very appealing to me. I didn't get the chance to test most of them in depth, but what I have seen so far, it looks very good. I like what they have done with those, and I like that the meta in that regard is getting shaken up as well. One thing that I specifically want to highlight on this topic are the Great Axe changes. Through a few select small changes, the Great Axe is almost getting a mini rework, mainly because the Great Axe is almost exclusively used as a clump weapon at the moment. The perk changes may allow it to have much more viability as a chase weapon again, where it's typically outclassed by other weapons lately. I like it when both skill trees on a weapon are equally viable, and it looks like they may be moving in the direction with this. Now, I said a lot of very positive things about the expansion here, but if you know me a little bit, then you know that I also like to talk about the negative aspects. I like to have a nuanced view of what is going on and discuss the pros and cons. That is what we're going to do in the next days, so if you're interested in me talking about both the neutral things as well as the negative things, then consider subscribing and clicking the bell. I will also discuss if I think the expansion is worthy of the label expansion in general. If you'd like to support my work further and you want to get some early trading tips and gathering tips in return, then consider supporting me on Patreon. Thanks to my patrons who already do exactly that. And thank you for watching. Sloth out.